Good morning again. Long time no see. So today what I'm going to be, it's no surprise, you can see it in the title of my message. I'm going to be continuing my sermon series, and surprise, surprise, I'm coming here again. To my knowledge, I think I only have 2 left after this, which are peace and then love, I think. I'm pretty sure those are the last 2 that I have after this. But today I'm going to be continuing onward, and I'm going to be speaking on the spiritual fruit of goodness. And goodness is, really they all are interesting in their own right, and they are all so unique and distinct from each other. And goodness is one of those interesting ones because, of course, it derives from the word good. Very simply, very, very easy, good. However, goodness and good, unlike the other ones, has in time just become a part of our speech. It's like we don't, it's become just a normal adjective that we throw out left and right. And we don't normally refer to someone's gentleness, or we don't usually talk about, any of the other fruits of the Spirit so normally. But we normalize goodness and the word good, and we use it in different parts of speech. Like we use it when someone talks to us, and the whole normal, very, very American exchange of like, how are you? Oh, I'm good. How are you? I'm good. And then you carry on in your life, and you're both miserable. That's very normal to just say like, oh, I'm good. Or it's all like, oh, how was your meal? It was good. Or you say like, how are they at basketball? Oh, they're pretty good at basketball. You say like, oh, I have a good TV right here. I bought a good one. Or it's like, oh, my kid, they're getting good grades. And you could say like, oh, my spouse, they look good. Yeah, they're pretty good. And even in the tones that we use for the word good, can change its meaning. Where when someone says like, oh, how's your day been? It's like, I want to know. And they give a long sigh, and they're like, it was good. It was good. That doesn't really sound like it was a good day. But then when you ask someone something else, where it's all like they're at their favorite restaurant, they get like a nice prime rib steak dinner. It's like, oh, how's the meat? And they're like, oh, it was good. Oh, it was so good. That sounds like it was good. And so we see some differences in the word good, but we've largely equated it to quality, roughly. There's lots of different definitions. When you look in any formal dictionary, there's lots of different uses for the word good. But when we look at it, it really comes down to a sense of quality, more so than anything, and in our own, and even in the sense of quality, in its ranking of quality, good is just good. When we think of the word, we don't think of like, oh, good. It's like when you say like, oh, how'd you do on your test? I did good. When you hear that, I would think like, I got a B-. That's pretty good, right? And so even good isn't that good. It's just okay. It's not like, oh, I did great. I did amazing. I did fantastic. I did good. And so over the years, the word good slowly has been diminished over what its original intention is. And when we think of God, He's good. He's a good God. We never say like, oh, God, you're just good. You're okay, God. Zeus was a better God than you. You're just good. No, of course not. God is the definition of good. There's a story that I remember reading about this pastor in Scotland where he took some time to go through seminary. And when he was there, he would always be asked by like one of his professors or someone that he knew that he'd see regularly, and they're like, oh, how are you? And him being an American, he's like, oh, I'm good. And then just carry on. Just after like several months of just normal interactions, they talk, but just whenever he would ask him how he was, he'd say like, oh, I'm good. Just very American to say. And one day this teacher, whoever they were, went up to this guy and said, I've never met anyone as good as you. And this guy, of course, knew, this is a joke. This is something at my expense. He doesn't mean this genuinely. And he said, what are you talking about? Someone as good as me. He says, well, whenever I ask, how are you? You say, I'm good. Okay. He's like, whenever I'm asked how I am, sometimes I'm doing bad. Sometimes, I do bad things. Sometimes I think bad things. Sometimes I'm just not great in general. But every time I talk to you, you are good. And so, in at least Scottish, or in Scotland, that culture, when you say the word good, it carries ethical and moral connotations attached to it. And so when you say I am good, it's like I am of moral, upstanding nature. I am goodness. You could even almost equate it, if it helps you understand the word more, you could say I am holy. It's almost like you're saying, oh, how are you today? I'm holy. Yeah, it's a normal day. It's doing perfect. I am perfection incarnate. No, and so it sounds weird in Scottish culture. And so when someone's asked, how are you? You actually divulge oh, I'm not doing so great, or today's been pretty easy so far. I'm feeling fine. That's a common word in English-speaking cultures they use is, I'm fine. Of course, we know in American culture, someone's doing fine, you know they're upset. Especially if you ask someone that you're infatuated with, you're like, how are you? You're like, I'm fine. And so, different cultures, of course, use different language to mean different things, but the word good, at least in Scottish culture, and really original English culture, denoted one of a moral, kind of virtuous standing. It meant something more than just equality, a quality. And over the years that we've changed it to meaning things like competency, or it's oh, I'm good at math, it's reliability, oh, you have a good set of brakes on your car or something, or it's strength, moral excellence, behavior, your kid, you have a good kid, that means they're quiet most of the time, something like that. You change the word good to mean a whole lot of things, and it's a very, very, very contextualized word. We don't have a lot of words in our language where we can use it for so many different situations, but over the years that's what we've transformed the word good into. And so what I want to do today was first look at the word goodness. And I personally always like to define things just so that we're all on the same page. And so what I first wanted to look at were the Hebrew and Greek words. And the first one, agathosun, A-G-A-T-H-O-S-U-N-E, who want those, is the word that in Hebrew they used for good most of the time. And it was very, very similar to another word, a word called Christotes. And what that is closer to is kindness with someone. And there's a man named William Barclay who wrote this commentary on Galatians, and how he compared the two, I'm just going to read out verbatim for you. He said, agathosune is the widest word for goodness. It is defined as virtue equipped at every point. What is the difference? Agathosune might and could rebuke and discipline. Christotes can only help. Trench says that Jesus showed agathosune when he cleansed the temple and drove out those who were making it a bazaar. But he showed Christotes when he was kind to the sinning woman who anointed his feet. The Christian needs the goodness which at the same time can be kind and strong. And so when we see one kind of goodness, the first, agathosune, it is more of something where it's more than just good character. It's more than just someone who is very kind and someone who is just they think of others all the time. That one is more passive. That's Christotes. That Christotes is someone who is just a good person. They don't do a lot of good, but it's like when you go up to them, you're not expecting them to harm you. You're not expecting them to hurt you or anything. You're just expecting, oh, they're a good person. It's a good man over there. That's what you would attach Christotes to. And for the other one, agathosune, that one tends to be something that is active. It tends to be something that is outward. As some commentators and some theologians describe it as something almost aggressive in how you handle your goodness. Aggressive in a positive way, not like an angry kind of aggressive. And so when we see someone like our Father in heaven, God, the ways that he can be a agathosune with us is when he convicts us. I'm sure all of us here at some point in time have been convicted. I remember there's this time in my life when I don't know how old I was at the time. I think I was like 21 or something. I was a younger man than I am. I'm still a young man, but I was younger than I am now. And this was before I had gotten the calling to go into being a pastor. And so at this time of life, I was partying, drinking a lot, hanging out with the wrong crowds. And I remember for this season of time, I was smoking a lot. And I remember, despite the life stage I was in, I never wanted anyone to know that I smoked for some reason. And I only smoked with one guy who got me to start smoking. And I remember this one time we went to some shopping center. And he's like, oh, do you want to go for a smoke? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I was like, let's go to this alleyway, because I don't want anyone to see me smoking. Even though I'm like, I don't know anyone at this mall. No one's going to see me. But somewhere in my heart, there was this shame that I carried about it. And I remember this was a day like after we had been up all night having a really rambunctious, very worldly party, to put it. And I remember I was sitting on these steps, just wearing like the clothing I slept in. And I remember just sitting there on this like hot summer afternoon, sitting on these steps, just smoking, and just like looking at the ground, and feeling this overwhelming feeling of, I really hate what I've become. And it was this overwhelming feeling that I just couldn't shake. And I felt that mixed in with this shame and this guilt of like, oh, I'm sitting here hiding that I'm smoking. I'm not even enjoying smoking right now. It's like I'm doing all these weird things with like weird people that I don't even know. And I hate this. I hate what I've become. And that was an instance of agathosune. That's where God convicted me in that moment. To convict me of something that I myself knew I didn't like. And God didn't desire for me to be living that kind of lifestyle either. And after that, I had a very radical change in my life where I think that was the last cigarette I've ever had. And I stopped smoking after that. I gave up partying. I gave up drinking to the point of drunkenness. I gave up all these things that I was doing in my very early 20s. And that's what goodness, agathosune, can look like in an instance where God convicts us to change. And it can be very powerful at times. It can be something minor at times. It all depends on everyone's context. I'm sure everyone has a story somewhat like that where you felt God convicting you to either change something, convicting you to take action on something in your life God has convicted you about. And there was goodness in God's actions, at least towards me. Well, really, in all of his actions. But in that instance, there was goodness in his actions towards me, even if it was of a convicting and more corrective nature. There was goodness in those actions. And we can see that with parents who correct their children from doing something harmful. They might be hitting a kid. You're going to correct your kid, and it's out of goodness that you're correcting your kid, because you don't want them to grow up to be this violent, angry, they are quick to physical violence kind of adult. You want them to be well-adjusted. When you see them doing something wrong, they steal something, they hit someone, they start cussing at a kid at 2 years old, something like that. Something bad that you see your kid doing, you correct them. And it's not because like, oh yeah, I just love picking on my kid. I want to see them cry. I just can't wait to hit them with like a spoon when I get back home. No, you don't think of any of that. Although as a kid you might feel like your parent likes doing that. But you do it out of the goodness within you because you want to see the goodness in your kid. You want them to be a good adult. You want them to be well-adjusted. You want them to have a good life. And I would say that's true for any good parent. Even though, unfortunately, in the world we live in, there are countless examples of parents that aren't good. And as we know, we don't live in a perfect world. And there are those parents that are abusive to their kids. There are those parents that instill those hurtful things within their kids, unfortunately. But for good parents, that's why they correct, purely because it's out of goodness that they are correcting. But also, as I say that, with that aspect of goodness, don't take that as a license to go out and correct every single person you see on the street, every single friend that you have that are doing something you don't like. You're like, well, Pastor said that there's goodness in me, and I need to correct you because I don't like the way you're drinking that water right there. Whatever it might be, don't take that as a license to go out and start correcting every single person you see. Because one other thing to note with this, even though I talk about these individually, each aspect of the fruits of the Spirit, these all go in harmony with one another. These are not meant to be done in isolation without each other. And they can't exist in isolation without each other. They need all the other fruits of the Spirit to coexist with them. Because when you're being good to someone, you embody more than just goodness. You're embodying love. You should embody gentleness. And it's also a kindness. There's a whole lot of different things that embody in an action that we do. And so it's not just like this one action is exclusively goodness. No, it's a whole host of the fruits of the Spirit. And in contrast to correcting someone also, or even in correcting someone, consider that gentleness, as I spoke I think a few sermons ago, is the fruit of the Spirit. We are called to be gentle, even when we correct. We have our humanness in us that flares up when we get angry at someone, especially our kids, I presume. And we want to correct them out of anger. And that's just our humanness, of course, starting to come up. But in goodness, there's also gentleness. And I want to emphasize that a lot because far too many times have I seen Christians, especially more than anyone, have this kind of righteous indignation. And they just feel like, oh, I can go out and just correct and condemn the entire world for everything that they do. And they get on this high horse and they're just like, casting out like, oh, you are horrible, all of you pagans, all of you heathens, this and this, how dare you do this, this, and this, and we've garnered a reputation, unfortunately, Christians as a whole, because we can be hypocritical when we take certain aspects of the Bible and certain aspects of whatever we want, and we use those to fulfill our own agenda, when really, even if it's only talking about the fruits of the Spirit, you should embody them all. If you're correcting someone, do it with love and do it with gentleness. Don't go at them. Don't attack them. Don't be like Paul in some ways, where he is very just like straight up with them, as we started with Galatians last week. As we know, he can be very straight to the point where he's all like, I'm so astonished that you left the faith so quick. Anyway, so there's many things to consider in this. Yes, there are corrections to be had, but also there is gentleness within this. And so, moving on, goodness is not just outward. Goodness is not just the things that we do. Because in our world, and I probably don't even need to go into deep explanation of this, there are plenty of people that, quote-unquote, do good. And there are plenty of things that happen that are good, but they're done for selfish reasons. And I'm sure we've all seen that. We can see big corporations that do like a publicity stunt that's quote-unquote good. Like, oh, we're going to go and we're going to help some homeless people, or oh, we're going to go clean up this area, or oh, we're going to go donate all this money to this orphanage. We're going to do something that on the surface is good, quote-unquote good. But we know that the ambition behind it oftentimes is for money. More than anything, it's for selfish reason. And that has happened all throughout time, of course. And so just doing a quote-unquote good action isn't enough. And so goodness is not just outward action. There's also an inward part to that, because there can also be evil motives behind something. And in that we can see instances with serial killers that have existed throughout time, where it's like they'll do a lot of quote-unquote good. They'll help someone someone, they'll seem so loving to someone, just to ultimately abduct someone and then do horrible things to them. And so on the surface, if you're just judging them by their quote-unquote good actions, you're like, oh, they're such a good person. They've done this, this, and this for the community, and they do this with these kids, this and this, and then lo and behold, a month later, they're on a rampage where they've killed dozens of people. That has happened many times. It's a simple Google search to find these sociopaths that do that. And so goodness is not just an outward action. There can be selfish or evil intention behind these seemingly good actions. And so all of these outward actions need to be motivated by inward goodness. They need to be motivated by someone who is full of virtue, someone who's full of moral goodness, someone who has godliness within them. And this is why, for all of the fruits of the Spirit, why I said that love is the one that is kind of, think of it as the umbrella over every single fruit of the Spirit. And then I said self-control is like the bedrock, the foundation to all of them. When you ask how for any of the fruits of the Spirit, the answer is self-control. How do I do this? How do I practice godliness or goodness? It's through self-control. And the answer of why, well, why do I want to be good? The answer is love. For both of those, love will always be the why, and self-control will always be the how. And with that, when we look at love, when we look at the nature of it, and I'll get to that fruit of the Spirit in a few weeks, love will always have a selfless motivation. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, love at its heart is selfless. Because we know that love ultimately comes from God. Nowhere else does genuine love come from but God. And when we look at God in his triune divinity, we know that God is inherently selfless. And we know that because there are three persons in one God, and each person in the Godhead are looking out for one another. Their first thought isn't themselves. Christ wasn't thinking like, oh, let me do all this stuff to better myself. What can I do to make me look good? No, his first thought is like, let me pray to the Father and let me yield to the Holy Spirit. And that's who God is. He is inherently love. And his love is inherently selfless. And so having godliness within us to motivate our goodness should be born out of selfless ambition. And if we have that inwardly, then our outward actions of goodness will show. And so goodness ultimately will lead us to selflessness. If it is motivated by selflessness internally, it will lead us, our actions will inherently be selfless. Those are good actions that we are doing. And as we know, we unfortunately live in a broken world. We live in a world where there has been so much harm done to humanity over generations and generations, where we have such embedded pain in us and such embedded hurt and damage done to us, that it can seem hard to be and do good in a world like this. But goodness in our broken world means participating with God in the work of calling everything back to good. Doing the work to bring things back to how God intended them to be. When we see hurt and broken relationships, we can't fix them, but we can participate in doing everything that we can within our human limits to try to see a broken relationship mended and allow God to do his part in that. And so we want to bring things back to good in all of our actions. And when we talk about these good actions, they are seldom, if ever, big. And this is a common theme that I've said when I've preached before, is that we have to get used to doing the small things. We have to get used to doing the things that maybe no one will ever see. We have to get used to doing the things that we can't advertise on our Facebook, that we can't go around and talk about like, oh, look what I did, look at all the things I'm doing. We can't do that oftentimes. Good actions are often very small. I wanted to look at 1 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23 to 27 today. And for this one, the context is a little bit different. It's not directly related to goodness. In this, Paul is speaking, of course, to the church of Corinth. And in this section, he's talking about food, specifically. He's talking about the food that can be eaten. And we know that in the new covenant of Christ, we eat whatever we want. We don't have to be limited to not eating pork or not eating seafood. It tastes really good. And so I'm glad that we're in the new covenant. Bacon's amazing. And that's what he's talking about in this book. And so, or rather, in this specific chapter and verse, he's talking about food, because that was a big deal, especially at the time for all these Jews who had this tradition culturally and religiously where it's like, oh, you can't eat anything from a pig, they're unclean. You can't eat any crustacean or any those sea-dwelling fishes. You can't have those. They're just unclean ritually. And there were actual health benefits to their rationale. That's where it came from. But beside the point. So that's where he's at right now. Verse 23 says, everything, or in quotes, it says, everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is lawful, but not everything builds others up. And so in him saying everything is lawful, in context, it's him talking about like, oh, I can eat whatever I want. It's like if I'm hanging out with a Jew, I can just bring out my pork dinner and eat it right in front of his face. And everything is lawful, and so I can do that, right? That was the context to this. And he said, well, everything's lawful, but not everything is beneficial. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's always something to consider, where he says everything is lawful, but not everything builds others up. And in context to food and out of context to just things in general, we can do a whole lot of things that are considered lawful, but that doesn't mean they're good, and that doesn't mean that they're helpful. It doesn't mean that it builds someone up, and we have to take into consideration the other. And that's what Paul goes into as we continue in verse 24, where he says, do not seek your own good, but the good of the other person. And that right there is everything that I've been talking about all this time, about goodness. Goodness should lead us to selflessness. Goodness should lead us to putting the other person first. In an idyllic world, and what I like to think will be like in heaven one day, in that culture, in that world, everyone will have the mindset of like, I want to put you first. And if we're in that mindset, it would be perfect. We would never truly have to worry about ourselves because we have 1,000 people worrying about us first. We have our entire generational history, our ancestry looking out for us. And we're trying to look out for all of them at the same time. And that's ideally how it should be. It's not. And we see the world that we live in today when everyone is thinking not, what can I do to help that other person, but what can I do to help myself in this moment? What can I do to better myself? How can I use someone as a stepping stone for my ambitions to get to where I want to be? How can I use these people to better my own goals? And we see where we are today. That's what happens. And thankfully, today is no different than Bible time. People were selfish back then. People like to look out for themselves first back then. As Paul said in Galatians, as we're looking at it, he called it this present evil age. And I think one of the hearts behind evil is selfishness. Very simply put. When you think of most, if not all, evil actions, they're selfish. They're putting the self first. When you think of someone who is abusive, they're putting their own feelings, their own desires to hurt first, instead of thinking, well, how is this going to affect someone? Maybe I shouldn't. And so the heart behind evil is selfishness. And so Paul says, do not seek your own good, but the good of others. And then 25 says, eat anything that is sold in the marketplace without question of conscience. Of course, that being more related to where they were at, where it's like, you can't eat pork, you can't eat fish, or you can't eat certain kind of fish. And that was more pointing to that, where he's all like, don't worry about going to the market. You can eat whatever you want to under the new covenant of Christ. And in verse 26 he says, for the earth and the abundance are the Lord's. And in 27 he says, if an unbeliever invites you to dinner and you want to go, eat whatever is served without asking questions, no conscience. And so with that, whether in context to eating or just in context to just our every single day life, you're putting the other person first. That is inherently what being goodness is about. It's putting someone else's well-being, their own good, first, before yourself. And this is something that requires the other fruits of the Spirit. This is not something that we can just do solely through the venue of goodness, where it's like, oh, I have goodness, I'm able to be selfless. No, you're going to need to learn love. You're going to need to learn peace. You're going to need to learn patience. Oh, you're going to need to really learn patience for this. Long-suffering, as I called it when I gave the message on patience. You're going to need to learn kindness. You're going to need to learn gentleness. You're going to need to learn all of these things, ultimately, to lead you to being selfless. Because selflessness embodies all of the fruits of the Spirit. And so, for all of us here today, goodness starts from God, of course. It starts from who he is in his very nature, to be selfless, to be loving. And it flows outward. Our outward actions mean nothing if they're motivated by selfish intent, or even worse, evil intent. But goodness is something that we, with all of the fruits of the Spirit, are things that we need to practice. None of us are perfect. All of us have those moments where we're a little bit selfish, even if it's not in an intrinsically damaging way, where it could be like, ugh, I don't feel like going to the store for my spouse right now. I'm just feeling lazy right now. It's selfish. It is. But you're also human. And no one's going to die from that either. But it's still an act that we need to practice, every single one of us. And this is going to take our lifetime. Every single fruit of the Spirit is going to take our entire lifetime to get good at, to be done actively, to be something we just inherently do, even without a second thought. It'll take an entire lifetime. And I want to emphasize that goodness does not have to be big. Goodness does not have to be something where you donate $100,000 to this church, which we would all appreciate if you did. But, but goodness does not have to be something big like that. And that's something I really want to encourage all of you. I know all of you are doing good in your lives. All of you are doing good things. Just as I talk to you and I hear about your week and I just know you, I know that you're doing good. And I encourage you in all the good that you're doing. The good that you do for someone is a good that I can't do for someone. The people that Loretta knows, I don't. And even if I knew them, I don't have the same relationship that you have with them. And so there's some good that you can do to them and for them that I could never do. And that is unique for all of us. We all have unique opportunities. We all have unique relationships that we have. And we're all able to do good in our own unique ways. Even if it's something that we're never able to share. Even if it's something we're never able to publicize. Even if it's something that we're never able to showcase or say. Thankfully, God sees it. Of course, that's not why we do it to be seen, but we do it to be like Christ. We do it to be like God. And so, when the time comes in the future, and I ask you how you are, I want to hear that you're doing good. Amen? Let's pray. Father, Son, and Spirit, we just come before you, and God, I just thank you so much for how good you are, Father, in every single way that we have defined it in our English language. You are good. You are goodness incarnate, God. And I thank you that you come alongside us and you give us the opportunity to do good ourselves, Father, to do good to our brothers and our sisters, God. And I pray for every single one of us who are here today who who aren't here today, for the opportunities that you present to all of us to be good and to embody faithfulness, to embody kindness, to embody all of the fruits of the Spirit, to ultimately glorify you and to point people to the source of all goodness and the source of all love. I thank you so much for just your grace that you have on us when we are selfish, for your grace on us when we choose to put ourselves over the other, even if it's not something that damages people. God, I thank you that you have grace and understanding for us in those times. I just pray your blessing for all of us as we go back into our world, we go back into our work, we go back into whatever it is, God, and I just pray that we are able to do good. I thank you so much, God. I just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.